Stories about people who shedding strange ways to save money. Story 1. 7 dinners for one Bernard. Working in an office with a team of 7, he was a master at finding ways to save money on everyday expenses. One day, while eating lunch, he happened to come across a promotion at a nearby cafe. Buy 7 lunches, get the 8th one free. The idea hooked him immediately. He quickly realized that he could use this promotion to his advantage and decided to share his plan with his colleagues. The next day, on his lunch break, Bernard suggested that his co-workers take a walk to the cafe, arguing that there were good discounts and delicious food there. Colleagues agreed because they were always not against trying something new and tasty. Besides, it was only a 10-minute walk to the cafe, and it seemed like a great way to stretch their legs after hours spent at their computers. When they arrived at the cafe, everything was going as Bernard had planned. Each of his 5 colleagues ordered lunch, paid for it, and Bernard cleverly added his lunch to their bill as well. And that was the lunch that ended up in Bernard's hands. His friends did not suspect anything, thinking that it was simple luck. They were lucky to be in the right place at the right time. The next day, the situation was repeated. Bernard again persuaded his colleagues to go for a walk to a cafe, and again he took advantage of the action. They ate, joked, and enjoyed their lunch, and Bernard ate for free for the second day in a row. All he had to do was to gather his colleagues and bring them to the cafe. Each time the scheme worked perfectly, and no one suspected that Bernard was constantly avoiding payment in this way. His ingenuity seemed to have no limits. However, his colleagues soon began to notice strange things. Every time they went to the cafe, Bernard seemed to be the winner of a free lunch by accident. The first time, it didn't seem suspicious to anyone, but when it happened a third and fourth time in a row, one of his colleagues began to wonder. Bernard had always been attentive to detail, but this time he had underestimated the vigilance of his comrades. On the 5th day, everything was revealed. One of his colleagues, Carl, who was always shrewd, offered to order for the whole company. Bernard could not refuse, so as not to arouse suspicion. Carl collected the checks of all the colleagues, paid for them at the cash register, and accepted a check with a detailed list of all the lunches. It was then that it became clear that the check contained one item with 0 value, a free lunch for Bernard. Carl did not make a fuss directly in the cafe, but when he returned to the office, he told the others about the observation. The collective was not happy. It turned out that Bernard had already been eating at their expense for a whole week, skillfully manipulating the action and gathering the group to get his own profit. No one minded if one of the colleagues happened to win once or twice, but when it happened systematically, it already seemed like cheating. When the next day Bernard again suggested going to a cafe, all his colleagues declined his invitation. They were no longer ready to play by his rules, and the team became noticeably more tense. Bernard realized that his cunning had been exposed, and no one else wanted to be part of his scheme. But despite this, he did not feel ashamed of his behavior. On the contrary, he thought it was just a clever way to take advantage of the opportunity. Story 2. Cents and rounding. In Canada, where the 1-cent coin has been phased out, rounding purchases has become an everyday practice. Stores round purchases to the nearest 5 cents to simplify calculations. For example, if the total purchase amount is 2.33 Canadian dollars, it is rounded to 2.35. If the amount is 2.32, it is rounded to 2.30. This system creates a small but noticeable change in the final amount, which is usually not conspicuous to consumers. However, for one of my friends, Peter, this rounding process proved to be a source of unexpected savings. Peter was a man who had a knack for finding benefit in the smallest of things, and his attention to detail was truly impressive. At some point, he noticed that the rounding system could be used to his advantage. He realized that if he paid close attention to rounding, he could save a little money. Every time Peter made a purchase, he paid special attention to how the amount was rounded up. If the purchase amount was rounded up, he paid by card because the amount on the card was divided exactly as it appeared on the receipt without rounding. In this case, he paid exactly the amount that was shown on the cash register display. Conversely, if the amount was rounded down, Peter opted for cash. In this case, he paid only the rounded amount, saving a few cents. This simple strategy brought Peter significant benefits. He did the calculations and noticed that he was able to save money on several purchases in a month. These small amounts added up to a certain amount that eventually became a noticeable savings. Peter carefully tracked and recorded his savings to make sure he was on track with his strategy. Peter continued to use his methodology on a daily basis. He learned to pinpoint when it was better to pay with cash and when to pay with a card to maximize his savings. He became more and more adept at using this strategy and even shared it with a few close friends who also began using it in their own practices. Over time, however, his observational skills did not go unnoticed. At first, the cashiers began to notice his habit of scrutinizing rounding and sometimes even talked among themselves about this strange customer who kept checking to see how his amount was rounded. To this, Peter would just smile, believing that his actions were justified. In his eyes, it was just a clever way of using the system to his advantage. Story 3. Master Guarantee. In a small town where every establishment and store was familiar to every resident, there lived a man named Richard who found a unique way to use the store warranty to his advantage. Richard was cunning and calculating, and his story began with the purchase of a microwave oven. Richard, like many people, purchased the microwave from a large electronics store. Immediately after purchase, he scrutinized the terms of the warranty, which was for 90 days. This term was exactly what he was looking for, as he knew he could take advantage of it. 89 days passed, and Richard, with a carefully prepared plan, visited the store again. He brought with him a microwave, which already had minor signs of use, as well as false documents that he had prepared himself. At the same time, citing a new problem with the device, he asked to return it under warranty. The problem, of course, was artificially created. In some cases, he pointed out that the microwave did not heat food evenly. In others, that the internal light did not turn on. Once, when the problem was the absence of certain sounds when it was running, Richard even inserted the wrong parts himself to give the false impression of a malfunction. Each time he brought the microwave back to the store, the employees, following store policy, would take it back and provide Richard with a new oven. This process happened like clockwork. On the last day of the warranty period, Richard would come into the store, and within minutes, he would walk out with a new microwave. Over time, however, employees began to notice strange coincidences. They noted that Richard always brought his oven back on day 89, and the problem he mentioned was similar to previous instances. Some of them began to wonder if something was wrong. Soon they began checking the return records and noticed a pattern that became too obvious to ignore. While the store was undergoing an internal inspection, Richard continued his scheme. He was cautious and carefully concealed his actions, but tensions began to rise. Each new microwave he received became newer and better, which made him more confident in his plan. But, as is often the case, every scheme has its weaknesses. At some point, after several complaints and inspections, the store decided to audit the entire chain of returns. Richard showed up on day 89 as before, but this time he was met with a new policy. His return was accepted, but was told that further investigation was needed. Richard's story soon traveled outside the store. It was discussed on forums, and the case became known to local journalists. People began to discuss the devious schemes people were using to cheat the system. The store had to change its warranty policy and strengthen controls to prevent similar cases in the future. Story 4. The Sauce Master. Derek was a man with an inventive mind and an unconventional approach to business. His hobby was collecting small sauce packets that were given away for free in food courts and fast food chains around the city. Derek started his hobby quite simply. He noticed that he used the sauce packets often, and one day decided it would be fun to collect them. At first, it was just a hobby, but over time he realized that he could make something more out of it. Every day Derek would visit fast food places and cafes in different parts of the city. He carefully collected all available packets of sauce, hiding them in his pockets, backpack, and even in the trunk of his car. It was an elaborate activity. He studied where the most packets were distributed and optimized his routes to get the maximum amount of sauce. Over time, his collection began to grow. Derek collected up to a kilogram of sauce a day, which meant hundreds of small bags, each representing the potential for his business plan. Once he had collected enough sauce, he would begin the recycling process. Derek purchased small bottles and filled them with sauce using packaging materials he bought on sale. He spent several hours each day filling the bottles, packaging them, and labeling them. The sauce that was once free was now becoming a commodity that he sold for $1 a bottle. This business began rather quietly. Derek advertised online, on local bulletin boards, and even offered the sauce to friends and acquaintances. Soon, other people learned about his product as well. Derek emphasized that his sauce had a distinctive flavor and variety that appealed to consumers. His business grew, and he began selling the sauce through small stores and markets. However, despite its success, things did not go smoothly. Some problems arose. One day, when Derek came to pick up a new batch of sauce, he discovered that one of the fast food outlets was no longer giving out free sachets because it had learned of his activities and decided to change its policy. There were also difficulties with health standards when some customers began to worry about the quality and safety of the sauce. Derek tried to find new sources of sauce and improve his packaging, but competition began to grow. Other entrepreneurs also noticed the potential in the business and began offering their own versions of the sauce, which made the market more difficult. At some point, Derek ran into legal issues. Authorities began investigating his business model and the legality of his operations. Claims were made about the use of free resources and possible hygiene violations. Story 5. Energy deception. In the university student dormitory where Alex lived, almost all students were looking for ways to save money. Alex was a quite ordinary student, studying at the Faculty of Engineering. He shared a room with Sam, a man with a very original approach to life. Sam was known for his ability to find unusual solutions to everyday problems. For example, he was known for his unconventional methods of saving money. One day, when Alex had suspicions about a sharp increase in electricity consumption, he decided to keep a closer eye on the bills. He was responsible for paying the utility bills and noticed that despite his normal use of electronics, the bills were starting to rise. This worried him, as they were already living on a tight budget. However, Alex soon noticed that his electricity costs began to drop by $10 to $30 a month. He could not understand what was wrong until he noticed one unusual behavior of Sam. Sam often disappeared to the university library, where he spent a lot of time. Alex decided to follow him without realizing that his roommate was doing something unusual. It turned out that Sam spent a lot of time in the library, charging the battery for his laptop. The library was equipped with free outlets, and Sam used this opportunity to charge his laptop's battery, leaving it charging while he did his own thing in the library. This gave him the opportunity to save money on electricity, as he used the charging battery to run his laptop when he returned to the dormitory. When the battery was fully charged, Sam used it to power the laptop in the room, thereby reducing electricity consumption from the outlet in their room. It was a clever solution to avoid increasing electricity costs. Sam noticed that his method did help cut costs and continued to use the library as a free source of power. Gradually, Alex began to notice other small oddities in Sam's behavior. He often took strange items with him that might look like charging accessories, but were actually part of his cunning plan. Sam also became more active in other areas related to saving money and often surprised his neighbors with unconventional methods of optimizing resources. Since Alex learned about Sam's methods, his attitude toward managing his finances has become more conscious. He began to pay more attention to the little things that could affect his financial health. Although Sam was pleased with his way of saving money and continued to use it for the rest of the school year, the experience left Alex with a mixed feeling. Story 6. The thrifty great-grandfather Mark had always loved to hear his grandmother's stories about his great-grandfather, a man with a very unusual character and a number of strange habits. great-grandfather was known for his frugality, which was sometimes eccentric. One of the most notable examples of his unusual habits involved tobacco. Great-grandfather, like many men of his generation, smoked cigars. But unlike most, he didn't spend money on expensive tobacco products. Instead, he bought the cheapest cigars he could find. These cigars were known for their poor quality, and many people thought they were simply unsuitable for smoking. But great-grandfather had a plan. When the cigars fell into his hands, they were first processed. Great-grandfather cut them into small pieces, extracting the tobacco from the wrappers. He collected this tobacco in a small container and often left it in an old wooden box. The composition of the tobacco was not the best, a mixture of low-grade tobacco, but great-grandfather considered it good material for his next unusual habit. When the tobacco was ready, great-grandfather used it for a completely unexpected purpose. Instead of smoking it, as many might assume, he chewed it. This was a personal decision that he felt saved money and allowed him to enjoy the flavor of tobacco without having to spend large sums of money. The habit of chewing tobacco was quite rare in his time, especially in such an unorthodox form. Neighbors and friends knew of great-grandfather's strange habit, but few understood why he chose to use tobacco in this way. Some considered him eccentric, others frugal. But for great-grandfather himself, it was a way to satisfy his craving for tobacco without spending too much money. Chewing tobacco, although it looked strange and unfamiliar, turned out to be an unusual way for great-grandfather to adapt his habits to financial realities. Story 7. Wooden Leg Mark's neighbor was a man known for his incredible frugality and desire for self-sufficiency. His name was Peter, and his story is an example of how excessive frugality can turn into tragedy. Peter worked at a small auto repair shop, and his life seemed to be going his way. He was known for his practical approach to everything, whether it was car repair or construction. But fate decided to test his resilience and economic philosophy in the cruelest way possible. One day, while working in a car repair shop, Peter was involved in a serious accident. His leg was badly damaged, and doctors immediately did everything possible to save it. Despite the doctors' efforts, the damage was so severe that the leg had to be amputated. This is where the real story began. Peter was in a difficult situation. He had enough money to buy a quality prosthesis, but he was convinced that he could do it cheaper. His idea of saving money went beyond reason. Instead of buying a prosthesis, Peter decided to carve himself a wooden leg. He spent several weeks working on this project, using simple tools and scraps of wood he had on hand. He carved the wooden prosthetic with incredible attention to detail, polishing and shaping it into a shape he felt was appropriate. At first, he tried to adapt to the new leg. He used it at home and sometimes went outside with a stick for support. However, with each passing day, his condition became worse. Not only was the wooden prosthesis uncomfortable, but it was causing a host of problems, from inflammation to pain in the rest of his leg. He couldn't get around like he used to, and his condition was rapidly deteriorating. Neighbors and friends offered to help him, but Peter persistently refused, insisting on his idea of saving money. He continued to use the wooden leg despite the deterioration of his condition. When the doctors saw him a few months later, they were shocked at how much his health had deteriorated because of the ill-fitting prosthesis. Despite the best efforts of the medics and recommendations to change his prosthesis to a medical one, Peter was unwilling to spend any money. He continued to work and live with constant pain and limitations in movement. Over time, his health deteriorated to the point where he became limited in his mobility and became completely dependent on other people's help. Eventually, Peter was forced to make the decision to get a medical prosthesis after all, but it was too late to fully regain his former abilities.